There is a particular moment before anything visible begins, a quiet threshold where nothing seems to be taking shape in a way that can be clearly seen. Before movement becomes recognizable, before sound takes on no meaning, before interaction forms into something we can easily interpret, there is a period that appears almost empty from the outside. And yet, within that stillness, something is already taking place. It does not loudly state itself, and it does not ask for attention, but it exists as a process unfolding quietly beneath the front layer. Inside that space, within the body of a mother cat, a connection is forming between her and her upcoming kittens. It is not something that can be pointed to directly, and it does not follow the familiar patterns of communication that rely on sight or sound. But its absence of visibility does not mean total absence. It simply exists in a form that requires a different way of noticing, one that is less about observation and more about understanding continuity. In this video, we will explore what exists between a mother cat and her kittens before the birth, not as a defined system of communication, but as a subtle process shaped by internal rhythms, shared biological states, and forms of influence that do not depend on conscious interaction. Because what appears silent from the outside may be carrying a kind of exchange that is constant, even if it cannot be directly perceived. Rather than focusing on what can be measured or clearly described, this exploration moves through the quieter aspects of development, where presence is established before recognition and familiarity begins before awareness. It is a perspective that asks us to consider whether connection always needs to be visible to exist, or whether some forms of relationship begin in ways that are felt long before they are understood. A connection before interaction. From a human perspective, connection is often defined by interaction, something that needs touch, response, or at least a visible exchange between two sides. We familiar to recognize relationships when they become active, when there is a clear moment where one presence meets another in a way that can be observed. But in the case of a mother cat and her unborn kittens, none of these familiar markers are present in the way we expect. The kittens have not yet opened their eyes, and they have not experienced the our world. They have not learned to respond, to recognize, or to initiate anything that looks like communication as we define it. And yet, they are not separate. They exist within a system that is already shaping them, one that does not require awareness to have an effect. The mother's body, in this sense, is not simply a place where development occurs. It is an environment in itself, one that provides not only physical support but also a constant stream of internal conditions that influence how the kittens grow. And within that environment, something begins to form that may not fit into our usual understanding of connection, but still carries its own kind of continuity. The language of rhythm. Within that internal environment, rhythm starts one of the most consistent and clear elements. The steady beating of the mother's heart, the rise and fall of her chest, the subtle and continuous movements that occur without pause. All of these create a pattern that is always present. It is not something that changes suddenly or dramatically, but something that remains stable enough to form a kind of background to everything else. These rhythms are not signals in the traditional sense. They are not intentional and they are not managed. However, they are experienced continuously, and that continuity gives them a kind of influence that is difficult to ignore. Over time, they become part of the conditions within which the kittens develop, shaping a sense of familiarity that exists even before there is awareness to recognize it. In this way, rhythm becomes a form of communication that does not depend on interpretation. It does not need to be understood to have an effect. It simply exists, repeating itself in a way that provides consistency, and that consistency begins to form a kind of stability within an environment that would otherwise be undefined. Emotional states without expression. There is also another layer within this process that is more difficult to define, and that is the emotional state of the mother cat. From the outside, these states may not always be visible, especially when there are no clear behaviors that signal a change. But internally, shifts in calmness, tension, or stress create changes that extend beyond what can be observed. These changes influence the internal environment in subtle ways, altering the conditions within which the kittens are developing. It is not a form of communication that is intentional, and it is not something that can be easily isolated or measured. But it is present, and it contributes to the overall state that surrounds the developing kittens. In this sense, the kittens are not simply growing within a neutral space. They are developing within an environment that reflects the ongoing state of the mother, one that changes gradually and continuously, shaping their early experience in ways that may only become visible later. The strongest bond. This leads to a question that does not have a clear or immediate answer, and perhaps becomes more complex the longer it is considered. When we think about connection, we often assume that it requires awareness, that it depends on the ability to recognize and respond. But what if that assumption is limited by how we define interaction? Is it possible that a form of relationship begins before either side can consciously participate in it, existing instead as a shared condition rather than an exchange of signals? And if that is the case, how much of what we later recognize as behavior or personality is influenced by experiences that occurred before there was any awareness to remember them? It is a question that does not resolve easily, and it may not have a single answer. But it invites a different way of looking at early development, one that extends beyond what can be seen or measured. You can share how you see this idea because perspectives on this often vary, and those differences can reveal something that is not immediately obvious. Familiarity before recognition. By the time the kittens are born, they are not entering a completely unknown state. While the external world will be new, the internal patterns they have experienced are not. The rhythms, the consistency, the presence of something that has remained stable throughout development, all of these have already formed a kind of familiarity. This familiarity does not mean recognition in the way we typically understand it. The kittens are not aware of what they have experienced, and they do not carry a conscious memory of it. But the patterns themselves have been present long enough to shape how they respond when they encounter the world outside. In this way, familiarity begins before recognition. It exists as a background condition that influences behavior without needing to be consciously understood. And when the kittens begin to interact with their environment after birth, those early patterns may continue to shape how they respond, even if the connection to their origin is not immediately visible. When silence carries meaning. Silence, in this context, is not the absence of communication but a different form of it. It does not rely on sound, and it does not present itself in a way that can be easily interpreted. But it carries continuity, and within that continuity, there is a kind of meaning that does not need to be defined to exist. What we often overlook is that not all communication requires a clear signal. Some forms of influence operate through presence alone, through conditions that remain stable enough to shape behavior without drawing attention to themselves. And in the case of a mother cat and her unborn kittens, this kind of silent continuity becomes the foundation for everything that follows. The absence of visible interaction does not mean there is nothing happening. It simply means that what is happening exists in a form that does not align with how we usually recognize communication. And when viewed from that perspective, silence becomes less about emptiness and more about a different kind of structure. The beginning that isn't visible. What we often consider the beginning of a relationship is usually tied to a moment we can observe, something that marks a clear transition from absence to presence. Birth, first contact, the first visible interaction, these are the points where we tend to locate the start of something meaningful. But in this case, the beginning may not be tied to any of those moments. It may exist earlier, within a process that unfolds without clear markers, shaping something that only becomes visible later. The relationship between a mother cat and her kittens does not suddenly appear at birth. It emerges gradually, through conditions that were already present long before that moment. This suggests that what we recognize as the start is often just the point where something becomes visible, not the point where it actually began. And when we consider that possibility, it changes how we understand the development of connection itself. Silent connection. The silent connection between a mother cat and her unborn kittens is not something that can be fully observed or easily explained. It exists in a space that is difficult to access, shaped by rhythms, internal states, and forms of continuity that do not rely on visibility. But its presence suggests that not all relationships begin where we can see them. Some begin earlier, within processes that are already in motion long before they become recognizable. And those early conditions may continue to influence what follows, even if their origin is no longer visible. If this perspective gave you something new to consider, you can subscribe for more episodes like this, where we explore the quieter and less visible aspects of animal behavior. Because sometimes what cannot be seen is still shaping everything that comes after, in ways that only become clear when we begin to look beyond the surface.